Good day, and how are you today? It's a beautiful day. And we have with us on the TV is Representative Peter Conlon. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm very well. It's a lovely day out.
Yeah, it is. And now you're in the legislature. This is your first term.
Yeah, it is. I was elected in November for the first time.
Yeah, so January, you're in there.
Yes.
And how was the first week? And then what committee did you get?
So I was elected in November. I replaced Willem Jewett, who decided not to run again, and I represent Cornwall, Leicester, Salisbury, Ripton, Goshen, and Hancock, so 6 towns. And I was fortunate that I was available for a lot of orientation that went on for new legislators, and there were 30 to 35 of us new legislators, which was a big freshman class of new people. And I was lucky to go to some multi-day orientation to sort of learn everything from how does a bill get created to where do you hang your coat up. And so that was very helpful to get in there. But once we start, it's a pretty big process. There's a lot to learn. I'm a Democrat, and so the Democratic caucus has some systems set up for some of us freshmen. I was assigned a mentor who I happen to sit on the same committee with, so I have access to her with my questions. And folks are just very nice. Where I sit, there's a lot of veteran legislators, and they were very clear. If you got a question, just turn around and ask. There's been sort of complicated legislative parliamentary stuff that's gone on, and I've been able to take advantage of that. And the first week was very ceremonial, a lot of pomp and circumstance, and it was very meaningful to me. Being I think probably maybe as you do this year after year, it doesn't mean as much, but to sit in the state capitol, elected, and to sort of be part of the swearing in of the governor and the swearing in of the legislature and all of that it was very moving.
And that's a 2-year thing, so you only do that beginning.
That's right.
Once every 2 years.
Yeah, so it's a 2-year biennium, and next year we just sort of arrive and hit the ground running.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're in the committee, and the committee goes.
That's right. Before we convened, we were all legislators were asked to fill out a form that asked what would be your top 5 committee choices and why. And so I filled that out. It was a little hard once I chose education, which I happened to sit on as my first choice. I chose the second choice was a committee that was dissolved. So that didn't work. That wouldn't have worked out very well. And beyond that, I didn't have strong preferences.
Yeah.
So I was happy to be assigned where I was.
And who's the chair of that?
So I sit on the committee with Dave Sharp of Bristol. He has been the chair for the previous 2 years and was probably best known as the chair of the Education Committee when Act 46, which is sort of changing the governance structure of schools around Vermont, when Act 46 was passed.
Yeah. So how do you find, now that you're in there a little bit and you're getting close to the end, things are happening? That's
right. And so things now start speeding up. We spent because it was the first year of a new biennium, and there were a lot of new people on many of the committees. Several weeks were spent getting lots of testimony just to sort of get us background, get us updated on where things stood, for example, with Act 46. So we did a lot of listening in those first weeks without necessarily acting on legislation. As the first month passed, we started dealing with bills that were introduced to our committee, debating those, getting testimony specifically on those. But it is amazing how time slips away quickly. And here we are, we're really nearing the end with maybe 3 weeks left at most. And the bills that we have passed have to go to the Senate. They have to act on them. Then they might go to a committee of conference. We've got to get out of our committee bills that came from the Senate, which is what we're really working on. And then it's a very complicated process. If we have a bill that has spending attached to it, it goes from the Education Committee to the Appropriations Committee. If taxes need to be raised to support that funding, it then has to go to the Ways and Means Committee. So it's a circuitous path that a piece of legislation has to do, and if it's substantially different from the Senate's bill, the two sides get together and have a conference of committee to put out a bill that will hopefully get passed. all of this has to be done now in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
So and a lot of it is I'm learning as we go.
Be prepared for the last day, which in the past has been the Saturday of Mother's Day weekend.
Yeah.
And 11 o'clock at night, if you're lucky, you get out and the legislature closes down.
Yeah.
Then you've either got to go home or sleep there.
Right.
And race home the next morning. Yeah. Which is what I did.
Well, we're hoping for getting out after the first week in May, which would be about a week sooner than is planned, largely because we've moved the big issues through, which is the budget and the tax bill and the capital bill, which is the bonding for buildings and grounds.
Well, lots of times, matter of fact, most times, the legislature was told we're getting out the week before. So we would definitely get out the next week.
All right. Well, that's very good to know. See, these are the things I have to learn from the veterans.
You always go out the week after, they say.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't do that, it'd be the next week, and then there'd be another week on top of it. Because you just can't, you have to aim to something to get done the next week.
Right. There is an extra impetus to try to get out a week early, and that is because we don't know what's going on in Washington with Trump's budget cuts. They want to have some resources available so that we can come back in October, late October, if we need to deal with some of these drastic cuts, because that will affect the amount of money we have available to spend dramatically. And one of the things I've learned being up there is the level at which Vermont is dependent on federal funds.
1/3, isn't it?
It is, and in some areas, it depends on the area. The Department of Education, not necessarily money that we spend on education itself, but that's about 65% funded by federal money. The Department of Environmental Conservation is a very high number. That is, the activities there are funded by federal money.
That means water.
That means water, and of course we have a big water bill and clean water bill, and that really counts on a lot of federal money to be successful.
Like Champlain.
Yes.
And I understand New York is doing work on that.
They are.
And Canada.
Yes.
Because Canada owns part of the ground of the north.
Yes. Because of who we are in Vermont, we're much more agricultural on our side. And so the science really shows that we are more responsible for the high phosphorus levels in Lake Champlain than either New York or Canada. They are doing their part, but the burden is more on us than it is on those other two parties.
Yeah, but we've passed legislation in the past to put some kind of berm or buffer so that the phosphorus would not flow down into but would stop at this buffer.
Yes, unfortunately, of course.
Doesn't always work.
Well, and Lake Champlain is fed by many, many rivers, which also have agriculture on them. So the new clean water bill is really addressing. The plan is to address on-farm issues, but also wastewater issues from sewage treatment plants, and then hardscape areas where it's all parking lots and roads, which also contributes significantly. Agriculture is the leading contributor, and then the hardscape and roads, and then the municipal sewer plants.
And it's the salt for the ice and the snow.
Yeah, the problem though is phosphorus more than it is sodium.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of money attached to it. We're under federal order to reduce the level of phosphorus in Lake Champlain by 35% within 20 years. And that's a commitment of $25 to $50 million a year from the state to make that happen. And that's in addition to what we already spend money on. So it's a heavy lift for a small state.
Yeah.
But we've worked out an agreement that we are in charge of making this happen. And if we don't get it done, then the EPA will step in and do it their way, which would not be the way we might necessarily want to do it.
Yeah. They have their own ideas.
Yeah.
So you're in Education Committee.
So I'm on the Education Committee.
And what kinds of bills and things have you been doing and working on? And you're on Senate bills now, right?
That's right. So we are currently working on Senate bills, and the two that we are most dealing with is a miscellaneous education bill. This is sort of lots of fixes to various laws cobbled together, as well as some other things tacked on. It's a little bit of a Christmas tree of a bill with various things hung on to it. Nothing too controversial, nothing that shouldn't allow it to pass through the Senate fine. We already passed one in the House. They have ours, we have theirs, and now we'll come together on those. The bigger bill we're dealing with, which is S-122, is really about tweaking Act 46 to allow it to be more flexible. Now, Act 46 is the large bill that has encouraged school systems around the state to come together under a unified governance structure, similar to what we've done in all of our school systems in Addison County, where we've gone from a supervisory union to everybody coming together under one school board that oversees the entire, what was a supervisory union. So in Middlebury, the new Addison Central School District Board oversees the high school, middle school, and the 7 elementary schools that feed it, rather than each one having its own board.
Yeah, and they were in the supervisory union. We had the same towns.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so it was sort of an easier way to go because we were already halfway there or more.
That's right.
Where
That-
other counties and so forth don't have the supervisory union. They got to start from scratch. We did not have to start from scratch.
Well, supervisory unions exist, but as you say, we were more than halfway there because our 7 through 12 grades were already in a unified district with a unified board.
Yes.
Because they went to the Middlebury Union High School and Middle School. And that's why it was probably an easier thing to do here, an easier thing to do in Virginia, same structure.
Yeah.
Easier thing to do in Brandon with Otter Valley, same structure, and Bristol. Where it gets tricky, but where it can be so much more effective, is in parts of our state where, well, for example, there was just a vote on Tuesday in Rochester, Bethel, Royalton, and then a lot of smaller towns around there. Now, in that area, those 3 towns operate very small high schools. And they're so small that they really can't offer kids much, because they don't have the student body and therefore the tax resources to be able to offer AP classes. They can hardly field teams for sports and whatnot. And they came up with a very creative way to join together under one board. In Rochester, for example, they would be sending their middle school kids to Bethel and then high school kids to Royalton. Royalton would be doing the same. And they were going to save a lot of money. So much so that they were going to be able to offer a new alternative program in Rochester, offer late buses, and taxes were going to go down. Sadly, it didn't pass in Royalton, South Royalton, but that's an example of a much more complicated system that really would have brought together resources and people to offer kids more at a lesser price. And we've got parts of the state where we have high schools that are literally 8 to 10 miles from one another that are too small to be able to offer what they want. And the whole idea of Act 46 is to bring them together. Now, the issue is it's proved very tricky. We have schools that are geographically isolated. We have schools that are structurally isolated, meaning that they might just educate kindergarten through 6th grade and then tuition everybody to where they want to go, next to a town that has a K-12 system, or surrounded by towns that have K-12 or K-8 systems. That makes them sort of structurally isolated. It's a little hard for them to merge with somebody else. So what we're trying to do is come up with this bill that will allow a little bit more flexibility for schools to get together, come up with a merged district of some kind, or find out sooner rather than later that they can say, we are meeting the goals of Act 46, but we don't necessarily feel we need to change dramatically. Many of them are concerned that they can do that, but they won't find out until the end of the whole process that's laid out in the law whether they actually can or not. Because ultimately it's up to the Secretary of Education to put school districts together to come up with merged districts, and many are fearful that they will be paired in a way that won't benefit them.
Well, there's another issue. It's my understanding that before Act 46, some schools along the northern part of Vermont on the east side actually had to send their children to New Hampshire.
Yes.
So now I don't know how that works, whether they still go to New Hampshire. I mean, they didn't have the people or so forth. They needed to send it to some other high school. I think there's some on the West Coast.
So we have learned about school setups around the state. Some of them are just fascinating. In Wells and Rupert, for example, they designate Salem and Granville, New York as their high schools. Mm-hmm. Those are subsidized by the state, so their cost per pupil to send their students there is like less than $10,000 per student, which is much lower than the rest of the state.
Yes.
And then, so the area you're talking about, the Northeast Kingdom, basically.
Yes.
In a place that doesn't like change, and they would tell you this, and doesn't like the state telling them what to do, they came together under an Act 46 merger, said, we're not going to do this, for a couple of conversations, and then started talking about the benefits to kids, and discovered a common ground to talk about. They have now come together, about 10 communities, under, they're going to go from, I think, 3 supervisory unions and that 3 superintendents to 1. But these are all those towns are what we call non-operating towns. They don't have schools. Their kids, they have school choice in all of these communities. So in many cases, kids go across the border to New Hampshire. Canaan, which is way up in the upper right-hand corner of Vermont, still operates a K-12 system. Some go there. St. Johnsbury Academy, Linden Academy are nearby, and a few other public schools, and many go across the border. Down along the Connecticut River, much farther south, we have 2 interstate school systems where there's actually a jointly operated system, but across the river between 2 states, that requires federal approval. We've got Wells and Rupert, which go to Salem and Granville, New York. So there's a lot of setups that work well, and others where they're more problematic. But it's the nature of being in a rural state. Yeah,
and we have to. The main thing is, do the children get the proper education? Because I met one girl. I think she was from Bridgeport or Addison, and she got to junior high, and she was shocked at what she had not been taught and how much more information and knowledge all the other kids had.
Yeah.
And she was livid that she didn't have the knowledge that the other children had.
Well, this goes to the question of equity, and that's really the goal of Act 46, is to make sure that there's equity across schools. And in our school system, in the Middlebury area, we are now overseen by 1 board, and the idea is that each elementary school will have the same level of expectations and the same level of, it will have equity in terms of what is being taught in each school. Now, equity does not mean equal, so that if one school gets a new bathroom, the next school gets a new bathroom. But it does mean the same opportunities and chances to succeed. And it's really important as these kids come together, as you say, into middle school, that they arrive with having had the same opportunities.
Yeah, I had Superintendent Burroughs here on the TV, and he was talking about the disability children, and mentally and physically, what they do and how they take care of them, and languages and how they take care of that in the different schools. Because before, school A would have Chinese, school B would have Italian, school C would have Spanish. Yeah. And then they get to the junior high, and they would have a different language.
Right, right. Now, foreign language is not something that we only have 3 elementary schools that offer foreign language, and it's all the same. But your point is well taken in that the level of offerings at each school, even within the core subject areas, were not always the same. And then as these kids come together, and teachers will tell you in many middle schools, union middle schools, teachers will say, oh yes, we know the kids that come from this community based on what they know, and this community based on what they know, because they weren't getting the same level of education. And that's really what we're trying to correct. And I think really on the road to doing that.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard. I don't know if it's more expensive that way, because you got money from all the towns, and when you put things together, like you said, they had 3 principals, so they only have 1 now.
Well, that was superintendents.
Superintendents. that does save money, and it saves going off in all different directions.
Well, and you know, it may, if it doesn't save money, it can at least reallocate people's time and money toward educating kids rather than pushing papers and dealing with school boards.
Yeah. Now, so how do these bills that you have affect what we've been talking about?
Well, so the big one that we're going to be discussing first thing Tuesday morning, S-122.
Is that on the floor?
No, in our committee.
In your committee.
We're going to get it out of committee quickly. So this will make it easier, we hope, for more schools to come together, work together, so that they can provide more opportunities for kids at a price that people can afford. You know, you were a legislator for many years. I'm sure you heard time and time again about the burden of the property tax.
Yes.
As we keep, you know, it's everybody knows that in Vermont we are trying to be a little bit more efficient and economical in how we educate, because we are having a big decline in enrollment. Just the demographics of rural areas are such that, and first of all, people are having fewer kids.
Yeah.
And fewer people are living in rural areas. When I was growing up in Vermont, I lived in a community, and very much a, you know, as you find in the Northeast, very much a Catholic community. Every family seemed to have, especially the Catholic families, had a minimum of 4 kids, and some had as many as 8. Well, you don't find that those families that large anymore, and so we just simply don't have the bodies.
I heard that in the larger towns, like maybe Middlebury, that the kindergartners were growing in number.
Well,
not much. But
well, that's just it. You know, we say, oh yeah, now we're, you know, some places might be showing a blip right now, but this is after a precipitous decline from in the past 10 to 15 years. So Cornwall, at one point in time, where I live, had 130 kids at its absolute maximum, and it has 78 now. Weybridge had 100 at one point, and they're at about 50. So, you know, it's a decline, and we don't see any change in that coming up. And in fact, we keep learning about how the sort of student to adult ratio in Vermont is the lowest in the country. And we just got statistics from our state experts that show that we went from about, that we just, instead of going in the direction of increasing that ratio, we've gone down again. So we used to have even more adults to children rather than fewer, which is more of a function of the fact that we have fewer kids and the same number of adults. Yes, I understand.
I'm having a coughing thing.
So this bill is, you know, in Vermont, we really need to get a handle on the fact that we have 20% fewer kids, and we are losing more. I think the student population went down between 800 and 1,000 in the past year, which is significant. And we're looking at a 20%, probably a 20% decrease over the next 5 to 10 years as well, depending on where you live, of course. The rural areas tend to get hit harder than the larger towns, which is just you know, it's how people are choosing to live now.
Yeah.
They want to be less dependent on their cars and more able to walk places.
Yeah. Yeah, and so they don't go out. Yeah. And the kids suffer because they don't even have any friends nearby.
Yes, well, and you know, I live in a rural area, and you know, I spend a lot of time driving to make that happen. So we're trying to make it so that more communities can come together and find efficient and effective ways to educate their children with this bill. And we've got lots of other bills that are coming out. Of course, the big thing that will be is the negotiations between the House and the Senate on the budget.
Called the Committee of Conference.
Yes, and the House passed a budget almost unanimously. We lacked one vote. Yes. But that's Republicans, progressives, and Democrats voting together on a budget that had no new taxes and no new fees. And the Senate may not see it that way. They may want to spend some money on some things, and that'll be a tough one to come together on. The governor has said he will veto any budget that includes new taxes and fees, and so we will have to see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, there are times when the governor said that, and we passed it anyway, and we had enough votes to override the thing. I don't know that you have enough
Well, in the House, I don't think we have an appetite for that. I
No.
think that we
No.
have heard from Vermonters that we need to work on our spending in the state. Right now, our spending and income kind of looks like an alligator with his mouth up in the air. The money coming in goes up because the economy grows, so that's about to go up 3%. But the spending, we've tended to even go up more, so that mouth keeps widening. And what we're trying to do is bend that curve down and close the line between resources or income and spending. And so this budget is a 1% increase. Income for the state should go up about 3%. And we're helping to really kind of bring those two together where they should be.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But it's hard. It is not without inflicting pain.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because certain people will get hurt
Yes,
who need the money.
Yes.
Or certain things will be hurt, like the water system,
that's right.
and helping with the sewer plants and helping with the runoff of parking lots and roads and everything going into the river.
Yeah. Well, the clean water money is almost in a different category of itself. That's money that we have to spend, and we have to do these things because there is a federal order that we do.
Yeah.
So they actually are getting a lot of money. But where things get hurt is in other environmental efforts, other educational efforts. We had a bill that was going to try to promote more career and technical education among younger kids in middle school, for example, to expose them to career and technical education. But we had some money attached to that, and that got stripped away, and we were unable to make that happen. So things are, it's not easy when there's no money available. But I think the people of the state are in favor of us taking a pause on new initiatives and new spending.
Yeah, they are, because sometimes they ask us for something.
That's right.
A lot of people ask us, do this,
Yeah.
do that. Well, I'm sorry, that costs money.
Yeah.
We don't have it.
Yeah, one of the areas we hear a lot about is trying to, amp up the resources for childcare. It is very hard to argue against that. There's no shortage of studies that show that if kids can get into high-quality childcare before they enter school, they are going to be well on their way to succeeding in school. But it's not cheap, and the money's just not there.
They're doing a preschool, like we have kindergarten.
Yeah.
And I think they were trying to do 1 year more.
So we do have what we call universal pre-K.
Yeah.
What it really is a voucher program. Parents who send their children to a pre-qualified, high-quality child care center get basically a check for $3,100 to help subsidize that. The idea is that will pay for 10 hours, which is what the state considers universal pre-K, 10 hours of pre-K instruction. That's on the one hand, and on the public side, many schools are offering now across the state pre-kindergarten programs within their school building. And we can argue
most needy, to the most needy, because that's really important.
It is need blind. In other words, you get the money, you get the $3,100 whether you make $1 million a year or you make $20,000 a year, which is a very debatable philosophy, I think.
Yeah.
We could say, do we really need to be? Are we not doing? Shouldn't we do a better job targeting that money where it's needed the most?
Yeah.
And expanding access to those who need it the most.
Yeah.
This is a debate we have been having in our committee for months.
Yeah.
And we'll continue to discuss it in the next session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's important that children all get to kindergarten with some of the same information.
That's right. That they're ready to learn and sort of know
Because
how
some
it
of these
works.
children can't talk at age 2 because they aren't taught and they've never been read to.
Right.
So we got to bring them up to the children whose parents read to them and have a book, and there's one word on a page,
That's right.
and they know them all.
Yep. Yeah. Now we hear a lot about the importance of building a child's vocabulary before they enter kindergarten.
Oh yeah.
Very important.
Yeah, because I think we got half a minute.
All right.
Is there anything you want to say that we missed on? I think so.
No, except to say that we'll be wrapping up in the next few weeks. We've got some interesting bills coming on, but you know, for my time, I've been very proud to be part of some bipartisan, tripartisan efforts. I think the budget, while painful, is something that Vermonters have asked for. There are a lot of initiatives that we didn't get funded, and that was unfortunate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and I hope that you have enjoyed all this information. Sometimes we hear it the second time, it sounds better because we can understand it better the second time around.
Sure.
And sometimes you had a lot of new stuff, so that was great. Thank you. Bye-bye.